I'm out here in Eau Claire with Chris Hodapp, the author of Freemasons for Dummies. Chris, you wrote this book a couple years ago. Tell me a little bit about it.
I did. It was actually a little over 20 years ago. The book was written at the time that the film National Treasure came out. And the publishing world was in the midst of Dan Brown mania. He'd written the Da Vinci Code and had made the mistake of telling the whole publishing world that he was going to write a sequel about the Freemasons in Washington, D.C. So everybody with a print shop decided to rush a bunch of Masonic books into print. And I was contacted by the Dummies people, which are based in my hometown of Indianapolis. And interestingly, the competing book, The Complete Idiot's Guide, is also based in Indianapolis. Brent Morris wrote a book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Freemasonry. Their companies are both in Indianapolis, which I guess makes us ground zero for dummies and idiots.
So you mentioned Dan Brown, and a lot of people, especially conspiracy theorists, like to get all excited about that.
Sure.
So was this effectively intended to debunk some of the nonsense?
It was, because at the time, there was sort of a cottage industry that popped up on the History Channel and several other cable networks at that time of having anti-Masons and conspiracy theorists. You'd get a documentary show about the Freemasons shrouded in mystery, with their rituals, secrets, and you'd get a bunch of anti-Masons and conspiracists that would talk for 52 minutes. And then in the last 3 minutes, you'd get a couple of rational people saying, no, it's nonsense, no, and never really got explained very well. And so that was part of the motivation of writing this book. I'd only been a Mason for 5 years at the time I wrote it.
Okay, so I guess it's been a couple of years since then, and you're also now a past master of your lodge. You're a Knights Templar. You're in Scottish Rite. In fact,
Right.
you've been honored with the 33rd degree.
Right.
If you were to have a takeaway from something like this, was this meant as a kind of like a crib notes or a quick little understanding about Freemasonry for the uninformed?
Yeah, like I say, I had only been a Mason for 5 years. Before I joined, I was motivated to join because of my father-in-law's Masonic funeral service, and was very impressed by that. And so I came home and wanted to join a Masonic lodge. This would have been in 1998. And at the time, there was nothing on the market. You would go to the local bookstore, and if you were lucky, all that would be on the shelf was a paperback of Duncan's Ritual and nothing else. There was just nothing out there in the marketplace about it. And I had gone specifically looking for Freemasons for Dummies. And it was just absolute. You talk about God sitting on his cloud. They called the Grand Lodge of Indiana when National Treasure came out and said, we need somebody to write this book about the Freemasons. And our Grand Master at the time, Rick Ellman, who's our Grand Secretary in Indiana now, has been for several years, many years, said, I got a guy just dumb enough to write that book. And that was how I got the job.
So it sounds like you got almost volunteered to do the position.
Yeah, like I say, that's God on his cloud going, you do that.
Okay.
And so,
it must have been a great honor though, being asked.
Well, it was, because in that 5 years, I was already a past master of 2 lodges.
That's fast.
Very involved in what in those days was sort of called electronic Freemasonry of the early computer bulletin board days and those kind of things, and discussion groups. And so I got up to speed very fast on the fraternity, and so that was why I got recommended to write the book. And I wrote it because I'd gone looking for it before I joined, and it wasn't in the marketplace, and I thought, this is a gaping hole. This needs to be out here.
Oh, that's fascinating to me as the immediate past master of Silas Shepherd. And in Silas Shepherd Lodge of Research, we all have our every master has to have a theme, and my theme was digital masonry, and not just the 9 o'clock toast, which we do every night on Zoom, but also whether it's TikTok or Zoom or YouTube. How do Masons communicate? I think that's something that people are really hungry for and they're interested in, and it sounds like you are really on the leading edge of that, so thank you.
Well, what I find fascinating about the book sort of took on a life of its own over the years. At this point, it's been translated into a half a dozen foreign languages. It's all over the world. There's something startling walking past a bookstore in Paris, and there sits your book with a French title. It's just odd. Okay. Or Turkey, you know. And so I'm astonished and more than a little humbled by the number of people that say, I read your book and that's why I joined the fraternity. I always tell lodges whenever I speak, don't mess this up. When you get a new candidate, don't blow it, because I don't want the guy to get mad from a bad experience and feel like I lied to him.
Right.
You know, I'm a shameless shill for Freemasonry. I really am, because I think we're needed now more than ever before.
Well, you know, I would agree with that, and it's interesting that you kind of talk about being a shill for Freemasonry, because, you know, for so many years people kept it quiet, and you hear about these stories where people didn't know that their own father or their own grandfather was a Freemason. Yeah. And you know, I'm one of those guys who loves to wear their square and compasses out on their shirts and on their hats, and I think we ought to be shouting it from the rooftops, because you're right, the world needs good men. We need to make the world a better place, and I think Freemasonry is one of those ways that we can do so. And you've been at the leading edge of that, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, I appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. This is Chris Hodapp, and I look forward to our next discussion. Thank you, Chris.
Take care.